as important, we've also been working with many other countries to provide you the support that you need to continue to move the country forward. Just going back to February of 2022, following the Russian reinvasion of Ukraine, the United States has provided $774 million to strengthen Moldovan institutions, to build resilience, and to enable you to push back more effectively against destabilizing actions coming from Russia. I mentioned already disinformation. Some of the things that we've been working on together with you include training, providing analytical tools under a memorandum of understanding that we signed in October of last year. We're helping to harden Moldova against cyber attacks, supporting a cybersecurity academy to train a new generation of Moldovans in cybersecurity. I think that will be to the benefit of the government, but also the private sector, where the skills that they acquire will make them very attractive candidates for good jobs. And then, of course, strengthening, bolstering a free media, and helping to support your efforts to clean up the justice system. Today, I'm announcing that we'll be working with our Congress to provide an additional $50 million to further advance these efforts, from reforming the energy and agricultural sectors to pushing back further against disinformation. That, in turn, will bolster the ability of Moldovans to resist Russian interference, to hold free and fair elections, to continue down the path to the European Union and Western integration, to create more economic opportunity. We're partnering closely to support economic and energy security. The Russian attacks on the Ukrainian energy grid have exacerbated Moldova's own energy challenges, raising electricity prices, hurting business, and harming consumers. The partnership that we have to reduce Moldova's dependence on Russian energy, to enhance connectivity with Europe, to increase the use of renewables, all of that is moving forward. And we've seen you take remarkable steps in a short period of time to move away from this dependence. Over the last couple of years, we've provided about $110 million in direct budget support to help compensate for the fact that you have to deal with higher electricity prices. A little later today, I'll have a chance to tour one of your main substations here. And I'm happy to announce that we will also be dedicating $85 million, part of the $300 million USAID effort to support energy infrastructure, to help you enhance things like battery storage, as well as the high voltage transmission lines that we've already dedicated some funds to. And that in turn will strengthen your energy resilience, strengthen your grid. The gas corridor as well, from Greece to Moldova, will further help wean you off of Russian energy. And all of this is also a shift to a more diversified economy. Right now, 80% of Moldova's exports go to Europe, to the United States, to countries other than Russia. And we want to now use some of the support that we're giving to help you grow sectors for export, including the agricultural sector, the IT sector, and also to offer entrepreneurs training, investing in technology, so that young people can have a future here in Moldova. Finally, let me just say how grateful we are for the incredible solidarity that Moldova has shown to Ukraine in its hour of need. Moldovans have firsthand experience with these challenges, and it's why they've stood so strongly with the Ukrainian people. Truly, a small country with a big heart. Welcoming over 1 million Ukrainian refugees since the war began, giving them access to shelter, to jobs, to healthcare, to education, facilitating the shipment of Ukrainian grain and goods, training Ukrainian deminers and border officials. I think Moldovans are acutely aware that what happens in Ukraine matters not just to Ukrainians, but to Moldovans too, and for that matter to people around the world, in Europe and well beyond. Because we know that if we allow this aggression against Ukraine to proceed with impunity, then would-be aggressors everywhere will believe it's open season for them to commit aggression. And of course, Russia would not stop at Ukraine. That's why we've been standing so strongly with Ukraine. And I'm happy to get into more of that later, but I think we're having a strong and very positive effect. Madam President, when I was last here, you said, and I quote, "A stronger, more resilient Moldova can become a pole of stability, a pole of development in the region, a trustworthy partner, as well as a stronghold for the free world." I think that the path that the people of Moldova are on is exactly that. And I'm here to reaffirm on behalf of President Biden of the United States our commitment, the strong commitment of the United States to Moldova's sovereignty and to Moldova's success. Thank you.
Stimați colegi, acum urmează sesiunea.
Dear colleagues, now we'll have the session of questions and answers. So let's start with the colleagues of the American media.
Direct challenge to Moldova at this time. And more specifically, Mr. Secretary, in recent days, a number of leaders, President Macron, Chancellor Scholz, Secretary General Stoltenberg, have spoken about potentially letting Ukraine use Western arms to strike directly on Russian soil when Russia is directly targeting Ukraine. You've been publicly reported to be the most forward-leaning senior American official to be pushing for that. Do you think President Biden can be persuaded to agree on that? Thank you.
From the start. So first, let's focus on what we're actually seeing in Ukraine, and not only where we are, but where we're going. First, when it comes to the Russian offensive in the northeast, directed at Kharkiv, taking advantage in part of the fact that the supplemental budget request that the President made was so long delayed in its passage by our Congress. But happily now, that budget request was passed, and not only was it passed, the actual arms equipment support that comes with it is on the move and being delivered to Ukrainians, and we're seeing that have a real effect, including in stabilizing the front and in clearly denying Putin what he was after, which is to try to take Kharkiv, to create, at the very least, massive flight from the city. We do not see that happening. On the contrary, I think what we see, again, is a stabilization of the front and a failure in terms of Putin's objectives if it comes to taking Kharkiv or causing the flight of its citizens. And as we look forward to the weeks ahead and the months ahead, we now have 32 countries that have either completed or will soon complete bilateral security agreements with Ukraine. And that will help ensure over an extensive period of time that Ukraine can develop a future force that can effectively deter aggression or deal with it if it comes anyway. And you will see those come to conclusion in the coming weeks. We're heading to the NATO summit in the United States, where, without getting into the details, and I'll be going to the foreign ministers meeting to help further prepare for that summit, I think you'll see very strong deliverables, as we would call them, for Ukraine in terms of its further integration with NATO. You're seeing on the battlefield the effect of different weapon systems that we and others have provided to Ukraine. We're working hard as well to make sure that we can find ways to access the sovereign assets of Russia that are now frozen primarily in Europe. And there again, I anticipate that in the coming weeks and months, certainly by the G7, we'll see further steps in that direction. We are working hard to deliver more air defenses to Ukraine, and I'm confident we'll see progress in that area as well. It's a long way of saying that in the coming weeks, in the coming months, I think you're only going to see greater resilience coming from Ukrainians and all those who support Ukraine. And if you project out over the next period of time, we are on the path to help ensure that Ukraine is a success. a country that stands strongly on its own feet, militarily, economically, democratically. And that's the ultimate rebuke to Mr. Putin. And it also tells him very clearly that he cannot and will not outlast Ukraine, outlast Ukraine's supporters. So I think that's a reality, a trajectory that people should have well in mind, and that should give them real confidence in the future. And again, the support that I see and that will manifest itself among so many countries for Ukraine remains strong, remains resolute, matched only, or maybe even surpassed only, by the resolve of the Ukrainian people themselves. We're committed to Ukraine succeeding as a country. We're committed to Ukraine winning the war, and I think we've shown that through the support that we've provided and many other countries have provided. We haven't encouraged or enabled strikes outside of Ukraine, but Ukraine, as I've said before, has to make its own decisions about the best way to effectively defend itself. We're going to make sure that it has the equipment it needs to do that. And another hallmark of our support for Ukraine over these now more than 2 years has been to adapt. As the conditions have changed, as the battlefield has changed, as what Russia does has changed in terms of how it's pursuing its aggression, escalation, we've adapted and adjusted to, and I'm confident we'll continue to do that. Madam President.
Given that we have presidential
Ținând cont de faptul că avem și alegeri prezidențiale în față și tenderul privitor la integrarea europeană, ne așteptăm să vedem tot mai multe intervenții din partea
This is disinformation, this is cyber threats, this is destabilization, this is using the criminal groups, the corrupt groups in Moldova to bring into Moldova Russian money and then to use this money for the destabilization, but also trying to bribe the elections. We have seen what happened last year in the Gagauz autonomy when Kremlin, using dirty money, managed to get control over the autonomy, and now Kremlin is trying to use this group of people in the Gagauz autonomy to destabilize the country. So we have seen, we have dealt with some of these attempts in the past. We've managed to resist and to make our institutions more resilient, but we do expect the situation to get more difficult in the next few months, given that we have elections.
Următoarea întrebare este de la Olivia Gazis, CBS.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Mr. Secretary. Just to be clear, Mr. Secretary, when you say the U.S. will adapt and adjust to conditions on the battlefield in Ukraine, are you signaling a greater openness by the United States to allow Ukrainians to strike legitimate military Russian targets in Russia? And as the U.S. has hesitated about where the Ukrainians can strike, numerous credible reports say that the U.S. provided the very precision munitions that resulted in the deaths of dozens of innocent Palestinian civilians, including children, at that refugee camp outside of Rafah. The NSM report that your department largely issued already assessed that Israel's military is likely not doing all that it can to minimize civilian harm. So were American weapons used in Sunday's strike? And are you urging President Biden to reevaluate any U.S. weapons shipments to Israel in light of its recent actions in and around Rafah? And if I may, sir, today, Israel's national security advisor said that the military offensive in Gaza would last at least through the end of this year. Is that acceptable to your administration, to the Biden administration? Madam President, the U.S. has been accused of moving too slowly to meet the urgent battlefield needs of Ukraine, even now apparently resisting calls by Kyiv and other Western allies to loosen conditions on where U.S. weapons can be used. Meanwhile, this virtually unconditional support for Israel has prompted some of its allies to say the U.S. is evincing a double standard. Do you see it that way? And how confident are you in the reliability of American support for countries like yours, known to be in President Putin's sights, now and after U.S. elections in November? Thank you.
With regard to Ukraine, adapt and adjust means exactly that. I think what you've seen over the last 2+ years is, as the nature of the battlefield has changed, as the locations, the means that Russia is employing have changed, we've adapted and adjusted to that, including, for example, by the different kinds of weapon systems that we and allies and partners have provided to Ukraine. Before this started, before the Russian aggression, when we saw it coming, President Biden made sure, for example, in drawdowns that he did months before the Russian aggression, the Ukrainians had Stingers and Javelins, which were instrumental in making sure that they could ward off the effort to take Kyiv and erase the country from the map. And at every step along the way, we've adapted and adjusted as necessary. And so that's exactly what we'll do going forward. We're always listening, we're always learning, and we're always making determinations about what's necessary to make sure that Ukraine can effectively continue to defend itself. And we'll continue to do that. With regard to Rafah, the incident a couple of days ago was horrific. I don't think anyone who has seen the images cannot be deeply affected by them. Just on a basic human level. We have been very clear with Israel on the imperative in this instance, as in other instances, to immediately investigate and determine exactly what happened and why it happened. And if accountability is necessary, to make sure that there is accountability. I can't tell you, as we meet here this evening, what weapons were used or how they were used. All of that needs to be the product of a deliberate but also fast investigation, and we'll await the results. I think we also know something else. We've heard from the Israelis, but again, absent a complete investigation, I can't verify any of this, that small diameter weapons were used in a targeted fashion to go after specific terrorist leaders of Hamas. Again, I can't vouch for that in this moment. We have to see what the investigation shows. But just assuming for a moment that that's the case, that that's what happened, I think we also see that even limited, focused, targeted attacks designed to deal with terrorists who've killed innocent civilians that are plotting to kill more, even those kind of operations can have terrible, horrific, unintended consequences. And I think it's very important in this moment, after Israel has had real success in helping to destroy Hamas's capacity to repeat October 7th, which was a very appropriate and very righteous objective. It has to ask whether, and especially in the absence of a plan for the day after in Gaza, further incremental gains against Hamas, but gains that may not be durable in terms of Hamas's defeat in the absence of a plan, how that stacks up against some of the, again, unintended but horrific consequences of military action in a place where the people you're going after are so closely embedded with civilians. And I think this underscores the imperative of having a plan for the day after, because in the absence of a plan for the day after, there won't be a day after. And this is where we need to go, and we need to get as quickly as possible a plan for the day after that does not leave Israel responsible for Gaza, which it says it does not want to be, But if it is, it will simply have an enduring insurgency on its hands for as far as one can see into the future. Or not, if not, Hamas will be left in charge, which is unacceptable. Or if not, we'll have chaos, lawlessness, and a vacuum that eventually will be filled again by Hamas, or maybe something, if it's possible to imagine, even worse, jihadis. I think the imperative, the urgency of having a clear plan, one that can actually help ensure the enduring defeat of Hamas, which is a shared objective and should be everyone's objective, is urgent, is imperative, and a plan that accounts for security in Gaza, that accounts for governance in Gaza, and that accounts for rebuilding the lives of the Gazan people.
As the national security advisor.
Again, let me leave it at that. And with regard to the remarks, I think what I've just said underscores, in our judgment, the urgency and importance of developing a plan that can actually produce the results that Israel, we and so many others believe are necessary, which is the effective, durable defeat of Hamas. And we've shared many ideas with Israel about how to do that in an effective and sustainable way.
We do appreciate all the support that is provided to Ukraine by US and by other countries. We do see that Ukraine needs more support. Ukraine didn't start this war. Ukraine is defending itself, and Ukraine is defending Moldova. And we believe that Ukraine should be offered all the support it needs, not just to resist, but also to win this war.
Acum vom lua două întrebări de la presa din Moldova. Vă rog.
Now we're going to pick up two questions from the Moldovan media. So good day, Svetlana Gore from Moldova. A question for Mr. Secretary of State. Recently, the Republic of Moldova and the European Union signed a pact for the security and defense through which they expect to protect the Republic of Moldova against the hybrid threats of the Russian Federation. The question is, have the United States considered signing a similar pact with the Republic of Moldova? Another question is, if the power in Washington changes after the presidential elections, will that affect somehow the Republic of Moldova and Ukraine? And for Ms. President Sandu, with your permit, will you request from the United States some guarantees of security for the Republic of Moldova, and under which conditions? Thank you.
With regard to hybrid attacks, the Moldovan people are on the receiving end of those attacks on a regular basis. Russia is trying to undermine Moldova, undermine its democratic institutions, undermining its ability to make decisions about its own future, using a whole variety of hybrid means. And I think Moldova has done a remarkable job in countering many of those attacks in a very professional manner. Much of the assistance that we've provided over the last 2.5 years, about $775 million, has gone to helping Moldova build resilience against these kinds of attacks. And so I think we're already engaged in whatever we want to call it, in committed, sustained support for Moldova to do, among other things, effective resistance against these attacks. Now, one of the other things that's so important is sharing information about disinformation and misinformation, which is one of the most potent hybrid tools that Russia uses. And that's something that we are doing. We have an agreement that we reached, a memorandum of understanding that allows us to do that, to both share the information, to make clear what we're seeing, also to help Moldova develop even more tools, more effective tools to deal with misinformation, to deal with manipulation of information. And this is something we discussed again just this evening. With regard to elections, I don't do politics, I just do policy. But what I can say is this, just take a look at Ukraine. Yes, it was delayed. It should have gone more quickly, our supplemental. But when it passed on an overwhelming bipartisan basis, both houses of our Congress, Senate and the House. And if you look at public opinion surveys, you see strong, enduring support for Ukraine, and more broadly, for the United States playing a lead role in defending democracies when they're under attack, when they're under threat. And I think that is very much where the American people are, and that's where I believe they'll remain.
Indeed, the Republic of Moldova has a strategic partnership with the United States. Our whole collaboration takes place within this very framework. At the same time, our cooperation is guided by the constitutional framework of the Republic of Moldova. This is additionally to all those pacts and interventions which have been mentioned by the Secretary of State. We have indeed a substantial cooperation in the field of defense, in the field of protection. So this cooperation started some years ago. So speaking about those elements of cooperation, we'll continue exactly with those ones.
Bună seara, domnule secretar de stat.
Good evening, Mr. Secretary of State, Ms. President. I represent the Zero de Garde. So the ambassador of the United States in the Republic of Moldova stated that currently you work on a more extended package of sanctions against the Moldovan oligarchs. Can you elaborate what sort of sanctions do you expect to see in the context where we can see that some of those pro-Russian oligarchs, which, by the way, are now exactly traveling in the Russian Federation, they're included in the list of sanctions, they still can promote their very propagandistic discourses using some American platforms like NATO. They pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to those platforms. Do you intend to intervene into that? Do you intend to dwell with that?
Thank you very much. It's pretty straightforward. We have used sanctions to go against those who seek or have tried to undermine Moldova's democracy. As we develop information necessary to support sanctions, we'll continue to do just that.
The institutions in charge of this sort of information in the Republic of Moldova, they're still collecting this information, this intelligence, and they pass it over to the authorities in Washington. And of course, the decision comes from Washington, depending upon the documentation and depending upon how elaborate those informations. I've seen some decisions already in the past. This element of cooperation is extremely important. Our fight against corruption, especially in the context when the Republic of Moldova is now undergoing a full-fledged reform of all the institutions which are meant to combat corruption. We're also in a full-fledged reform of the judiciary. And at this phase, our institutions are not fully efficient yet, or let me say, they're not efficient to an extent to be capable to cope alone with these sort of issues. Therefore, the support of the United States is very important in this context, especially since all issues related to corruption, they are crossing borders of all the countries. This is why we need to find some joint solutions. Excuse me, Mr. Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, are there any ways through which United States could step in order to stop, in order to prevent Meta in promoting this sort of information, or rather disinformation?
So this is a question that's very complicated and in some ways beyond my own jurisdiction and my own remit. We always urge any of the social media platforms to make sure that they're applying their own rules, and most of them have the necessary rules, terms of service, as they're called. And so certainly we look and expect platforms to do just that. And where it's appropriate for us to share any information with them, of course, we'll do that. But they act independently. They make their own decisions. And again, we hope and expect that they'll follow their own rules, and if information is brought to them about the abuse of their platforms, that they'll take necessary action.
Stimați colegi, evenimentul a luat
Dear colleagues, our event is over. Now we'll invite the two officials to take a joint photo.